Hi, this is Tamara Kelly, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet part 2 of the Sideways Sampler Shawl, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Again, please go to the link in the description or simply go to your favorite search engine and type in Moogly Sideways Sampler Shawl, and the pattern should pop right up. This pattern and its tutorials are being presented in 4 parts. This is number 2. You'll find part 1 already on my channel. To make this shawl, I used a USH 5mm crochet hook. This one is by Furls, and the yarn I used in the original is Concept by Katia 4-ply Symmetric Socks and More Illusion, approximately 620 yards. In addition to the hook and yarn, you'll want to have some stitch markers handy to make this pattern. We've already covered rows 1 through 35 in part 1, so we're going to jump in with row 36 in part 2. So in part 1, we started at the beginning end and worked our way up to about right here. So now in part 2, we'll pick up right here and work our way up to about here where I've put this second stitch marker. So in this section, we finish up this shell stitch pattern that we were making right here. We'll have some of those standard double crochet rows. I think you've got the hang of those now. And then we've got one more stitch pattern and some more of those double crochet rows to finish up part 2. We're getting wider, so there's a lot more stitches in this section in the rows. So we don't have as many rows, but just as many stitches because the rows themselves are getting longer. So let's go ahead and get started with part 2. So here's where we left off at the end of row 35. So as you reinsert your hook to begin row 36, make sure that it's in the loop the right way with the part that moves in front. Then we're ready to turn and make row 36. We start with a chain of 1, and then single crochet in the first stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and put a stitch marker right in that first stitch. You'll notice I left that stitch marker in the center corner when we left off as well. We want to make sure to always keep that in the corner as long as we're doing our increases. So after we've made our first single crochet, we begin the repeat for the first half here of this row, row 36. We're going to chain 2, 1, 2, then we skip 2 stitches, 1 and 2. Notice right away that brings us to that chain 1 space, and we're going to single crochet in the chain 1 space. So if you came straight here from the previous tutorial, you probably remember that's what we were doing here in this section. We chain 2 again, and then single crochet between those stitches, sort of in between those shell stitches that we were doing in the previous row, the wide V's. So remember our stitch pattern from before. Chain 2, single crochet in that chain 1 space, chain 2, single crochet between that wide V and that wide V, and continue just like that across, and I'll join you again as we get closer to that center corner. So we continued in that same pattern until we come right here. You can see we've got, these are the big V's that we're calling in the pattern. We've got our big V worked into that center space of the previous row. We're going to chain 2, skip over the first half of it here, and in that marked corner, we're going to work a single crochet, chain 1, place marker. So we're going to move that stitch marker right on up around that chain 1, and then single crochet again in that chain 1 space. And then we're going to continue working in that same pattern back down to the end. So we can see we need to chain 2, and then we can single crochet between those big V's. Chain 2 again, and single crochet in that chain 1 space in the center of the next big V. So we'll just continue down this side, and I'll see you again as we get to the end of row 36. So here you can see I've worked down the second side just as before. When we get to the end, of course, we're going to work our last single crochet right in that last stitch so that our row is nice and anchored. And with that, we're now ready for row 37. So I've taken the liberty of making our first stitch already for row 37, a chainless starting double crochet. You saw me do that several times in part 1, so I went ahead and made it for our first stitch. So now we can jump right into the repeat for row 37. And for row 37, we're essentially setting up another section of plain double crochet stitches, but of course we need to do something special to work into what we've got right here. So again, after we've done our double crochet or double crochet substitute in our first stitch, we then double crochet in the next chain space. So we can go right in that chain 2 space, nice and easy. Then we double crochet in the next single crochet. And because of the way that row is lined up, that's our repeat. Double crochet in the next chain space, and then double crochet in the next single crochet. Double crochet in the next chain space, and again, double crochet in the next single crochet. So we're going to continue this all the way till we get to that center corner. So I'll see you when we get there. All right, so I've been working double crochets, one each into the single crochets and in those chain spaces, and that brings us to the first single crochet that was worked into the previous corner there. So we're right at our marked chain space. So in that marked chain space, our corner, we're going to work a double crochet, chain 2, and place marker. Always want to keep moving that up as long as we've got our increases going. Once we start decreasing, you can get rid of the center one, but for now it's important. And then, of course, we want to double crochet back in that same chain 1 space. There we are. Then we can pick up our pattern again. Now coming down this side, we first need to double crochet in the single crochet right there, the other one that was in the previous corner. And then we can go ahead and double crochet in the chain space, and then the single crochet, and then the chain space, all the way down until we get to the end and double crochet in the very last stitch. So I'll see you at the end of row 37. So here's what your shawl should look like at the end of row 37. This sets us up for 4 more of those plain double crochet rows, the ones we're doing in between our special stitches. So for rows 38 through 41, we double crochet to the corner, and then in each corner space, we put a double crochet, chain 2, and place that marker, and double crochet again. Our standard double crochet rows. So you will end up with a total of 72 double crochets at the end of row 41. For the purposes of time in this demonstration and being able to get it all filmed in a day, I'm going to go ahead and skip those rows and jump ahead to row 42. So I've taken the liberty of making the first stitch of row 42, again, whichever double crochet substitute you prefer. After that, we're ready to begin our repeat. We skip the next stitch and then make a V-stitch in the next stitch. And that's our repeat. Skip the next stitch, V-stitch in the stitch after that. Now, remember, for this pattern, a V-stitch as defined as double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet worked all into the same stitch. So let's do that together. We're going to skip the next stitch and V-stitch in the stitch after that. So that's double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet in that same stitch. Then we skip the next stitch and do it again. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet in that same stitch. Just like that. So you'll keep doing that across until we get to that center space, and I'll meet you there. So you can see I've worked my V-stitches all the way until we've got one stitch before our marked corner chain 2 space. So we're going to skip that last stitch and work another V-stitch right in that space, right in our corner. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet again. And of course, we want to move our stitch marker up to that chain 1 because that is our new corner. After that, we work down the side the same way. We're going to skip the next stitch and V-stitch in the stitch after that. Continue in pattern, and I'll see you at the end of the row. So here I've come to the end of row 42. We did our V-stitches down the side. We always skip a stitch in between, and then we skip that second to last stitch and put one single crochet in the very last stitch to even out and do the same thing we did at the very beginning. So now, with that done, we're ready for row 43. So now we're ready to begin row 43. I've already made my starting double crochet in the first stitch, and of course, you can always make it however you like. Then we get to do another new stitch. We're going to work an X stitch in each of our V stitches. So let's take a look at what we've got right here. Here is the first one of our V stitches in the row below. We're going to work a double crochet into the second of those double crochets. So we're going to skip the first double crochet, skip the chain 1 space, and work a double crochet into the second double crochet of that V below. Then we'll chain 1, and now we're going to double crochet back in that skipped double crochet, the first one of the V, working in front of the double crochet we just made. So that means we're going to yarn over, and we want to sort of pull our work apart. Give yourself a little bit of room here and put your hook right in the top of that first double crochet, the one you skipped. Now, what I like to do is sort of use my hook to grab the top of that stitch and pull it forward while I peel that first double crochet we made back out of the way. Then I've got a clear path to make my double crochet. Don't worry, I'm going to show you that a few more times. All right. Once we've made one, we skip over to the next V. Come over here and look at the next V stitch. Once again, we skip the first half and that chain one. We want to go to the second leg of the V below and put a double crochet right in the top of that stitch. Then we chain one. And now we want to double crochet in that double crochet that we just skipped. So we're going to insert our hook in the top of that V stitch. And you can see here, it would be very easy to enclose that first double crochet that we made in this X, but we don't want to do that. So we're just going to use our hook to pull the top of that stitch forward a little bit and give ourselves a clear path to just make that double crochet. Let's do it again. We come to the next V stitch, we double crochet in the far leg and chain one, and then double crochet in the skipped double crochet. Just peel that first double crochet of the X back out of the way. And then you can finish the stitch just like so. This can take a little bit of practice, but you get this really neat X on top of each one of your V's. So continue to work across, and I'll meet you back at that center corner. So you can see here, I've worked an X stitch in each one of my V stitches, which brings us to that V stitch that we had in the corner of our previous row. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to treat this one like a corner rather than like a V stitch. We're going to work 2 double crochets, followed by a chain 2, place marker, and then 2 double crochets in this chain space for this one, in this corner. So there's our first 2 double crochets. I'll chain 2, move that stitch marker right on up to our new chain 2 space there. There we go. And then 2 more double crochets in that same chain 1 space. With that, we can skip over that double crochet, the second half of that V-stitch, and pay attention to the V-stitches down along this side, and work, of course, an X stitch into the top of each one of these V's down along the side until we get to the end. So I'll meet you there. So you can see I put an X stitch on top of each of those V-stitches, which brings us right to that last stitch, and we finish up row 43 with a double crochet in the very last stitch. And now we're ready for row 44. To begin row 44, we work another double crochet substitute in that first stitch, whichever one you like, and then our repeat that takes us to the corner is going to be working a V-stitch in the chain 1 space of each of those X stitches. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm going to find that first X stitch right here in the row below, and you can kind of pull it apart if you need to find that chain 1 space in between the double crochets. But we're going to go right in there and make a V-stitch. Remember, that's double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Then we jump right on over to that next X stitch and find the chain 1 space in between the double crochets and put a V-stitch right there. And that will take us right about up to that corner. So I'll see you after we put a V-stitch in each of those X stitches of our first half of the row. So you can see here, I've put a V-stitch in each of those X's, and that's brought us to what we have happening here in the center. So what we're going to do is you can see here we have 2 more double crochets before our corner, and we want to put a V-stitch right between these 2 double crochets. So that's double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet again, right between those posts right there. Then we're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to work a double crochet, chain 2, and double crochet in that corner. And of course, we're going to move that stitch marker right on up here to that new chain 2, our new corner. And then we want to repeat what we did on the first half. So that means we're going to start by putting a V-stitch between these 2 double crochets here. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And then We're ready to continue down the side like we were doing before, putting a V-stitch in the center of each of those X stitches, right in that chain 1 space between the double crochets. So we're going to continue that right on down to the end, and I'll see you when we get to the end of row 44. So I've finished up row 44 with a V-stitch in the top of each of those X stitches in the row below, and then of course we need to put 1 double crochet in that very last stitch to finish it all up. So this is what it should look like at the end of row 44, and now we're ready for row 45. So coming back to the original shawl, you can see right here is row 42 with our V-stitches. Here we have row 43 with our X stitches, and here we have row 44, another row of V-stitches that we just finished. Row 45 is another repeat of the X stitches, just like the row we did below, but of course, we'll have another V there. We're increasing our stitches, but otherwise it's exactly the same. Same goes for row 46, which would be our final row of V stitches right here. So rows 45 and 46 are really just repeats of rows 43 and 44 with a couple more repeats because our rows have gotten longer. After that, we go right back to our double crochet stitches. So if we pull this down a little bit right here, you can see we're going to end section 2 here, part 2 if you will, on row 52. So for this section, we switch back to those standard double crochet rows. You can refer to your written instructions if you need to. We've got rows 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, and 52. All standard double crochet rows with that increase in the middle, just like we've been doing in all those plain double crochet sections before. So you can follow along with the written instructions for that or refer back to the previous video sections if you need to. And then we'll be able to pick it up here in part 3 with row 53. And you can see then we've got just a few more rows of increases before we switch over to the decreases. So lots of excitement coming in parts 3 and 4. And that's how to crochet part 2 of the Sideways Sampler Shawl. We'll pick back up with row 53 in part 3. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.